Well, it is a sincere pleasure to introduce our first speaker today. And Rita, I really want to thank you for joining and thank you for spending time, because I know you've been spending quite a bit of time in different formats with different people in the community. Now, before we start, would you like to share your own screen and run it on your side, or would you like us to run it on our side?
If you don't mind if I run it, it'll be just less back and forth, if that's all right.
That should be fine. Are you able to share on your end, or do you
Let me see. It says I can't because somebody else is sharing.
All right, I'm going to stop my share.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, as Rita starts, lining up, I think I first met Rita in a conference in Berlin. I believe it was 2013. And
that was Alex's conference?
Yeah, and
wow.
I didn't tell you, but I think Michael was there too, but he was probably busy working or staying in the bar or both. I don't know, but I do believe that you, Michael Manila, has met previously. But I'm very happy that you're with us here today, Rita. And as we talked about, we have been using your work and your research and also the innovation maturity scale in different use cases. So I know that you have both a presentation and also an invitation for many of the partners today. So Rita McGrath joining us from New Jersey, New York. Welcome. It's good to have you with us.
Thank you. Well, hi, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. And I've been with Chris, goodness, when Strategy Tools was a bunch of drawings, on a big whiteboard and Chris is so visual. I love that about him. That conference was 2012, if memory serves me, that design summit. So what I'm going to talk about for a few minutes is the greater context of strategy, how we're thinking about it, also to share with you what Valise is all about, which is something new. My partner Ron Bawar is out there somewhere, and he'll be able to comment on making some of this practical. But let me spend a minute on Valise, which is, Rita McGrath has run around the world writing books and articles, and it's all great. But at the end of the day, I got very frustrated by the fact that so many times people would come to a session or come to a talk and they'd say, this was fantastic. The scales have fallen from my eyes. This is great. And then they go back to their company and it's sort of like, well, what is it? Is it a spreadsheet? Is it, is it a power? Like, how do I do this? And so Valise has been through about 6 iterations. We want to talk about things not working out the way we hoped. We've been through 3 software platforms, 2 different efforts. And I think we're finally heading in a good direction now. So it'll be an invitation to partner with us as we think about what form this capability and tool-based effort should be in. So let me start with the context, which is that we all know this, but I think it's worth revisiting, that today it's not enough to think about the exploitation part of the strategy journey, that we really need to be building organizations that can do the innovation and growth part, the beginning of where strategies come from. Yes, the exploitation part of where, turning the crank, quarterly earnings, that kind of thing, but also the transformation part where an old strategy is beginning to go away, or technology is changing, or something is really shifting in the world, and we need to transform in some meaningful way, or we are not going to be successful going forward. So this particular slide is one that I love. It's a picture of market share shifts in the gaming business over time. And in the beginning, what did you have? You had arcade games. That's all there was. You had to go to a physical place. By the way, this is not like ancient history. This is maybe a few decades ago, but you had to go to a physical place, interact with this machine that was an analog machine. So it literally had pulleys and levers, and the machine and the game were the same. So there was no sense of software at that point. So of course, the next big revolution was software. So you had games on cassette tape. Anybody remember those? And you had the machine, which could now play multiple games. So that was amazing and wonderful. And then you started to have games on CDs, games played on general purpose devices. And of course, today we have games played on weird headsets and in the air and on massive multiplayer platforms. And the point is, this is the environment in which many of the organizations we work with are living in. And the key thesis here is that if that's the environment outside your organization, you need to be able to build an organization that can grapple with that inside. And that really is the context in which I think strategy finds itself today. And we have a whole new playbook for what strategies I think all about. And that's what many of us who are in the field of advising or consulting are really trying to figure out is most organizations today are really built for stability. And if you think about it, in the past, when advantages were more sustainable than they are. There were higher entry barriers. There was less ability for a startup from nowhere to blow up your market. Most managers survived by exploitation. And today we really don't think they can anymore. And that's the genesis of the particular tool I'm going to share with you. So many of you will be familiar with my work on strategic inflection points. And I won't spend too much time on this, but I think the message I would like the world to understand at the moment is an inflection point changes things. It changes things by an order of 10x. And you're either going to benefit from it and do really well, or you're not going to, and it's not going to be so great. Steady state is not possible after you've gone through an inflection point. And I think that's the real root of what Ron and I are really talking about when we're thinking about this innovation maturity scale. So when I think about innovation, and by innovation, I mean something new that creates value. It could be a new business model. It could be a new way of doing processes. It could be, something that's just different than what we've done historically. But it's something new. It's something different. And here's the problem. Right, that in many organizations, the weight of the existing system, and you were just talking about this earlier, which is let's put some metrics around this. Let's think about, how can I make this look good? We've got the quarter. These are all symptoms of a lack of balance between what you need to be doing for your future and what's dominating your thought process today. And this is still the case in many, many companies. There are very few, I think, that have a good balance. So what some years back, and Christian was actually one of the first people to really support this, I got to thinking about what would it take to think about how much mastery there is of getting this balance right in an organization, and develop something I call the innovation mastery scale. And it goes all the way from level 1, right, where you're basically a regulated utility and you have a meeting with customers once a year because they set your rates, and the rest of the time it's all about efficient operations. And I'm not being critical. There's some contexts in which that's what you want, right? But if you are in an environment like that gaming environment I just showed, innovation is not optional. You need to be moving more rapidly. As you move up the scale, you typically go through a stage which we call innovation theater. We send everybody off to Silicon Valley, and we have, kombucha bars and foosball tables and lots of boot camps where thousands of Post-it notes go to die. But nothing really happens. As we move up the scale, you start to see localized innovation. So maybe it takes root in a few little places. You have some local successes. Then you start to see opportunistic innovation. So a big category opens up and somebody leaps on it. But as we get more and more mature, and I would say that the highest levels of maturity, you can think of companies like Netflix or Amazon, where innovation is not this separate, weird activity that only a few anointed people do. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. And we have a lot of companion work on this in terms of where you locate innovation, where it goes. But essentially, what you've got is a different set of levels around innovation maturity. And by the time you get to innovation mastery, it's not even a separate process. It's just like it's the air. It's like the water. What do you be? So how do we get at this? So the first thing I would say is, if you'd like to, so it's an assessment, right, which uses the company, and we're very interested in collaborating. We're trying to figure out how to get this thing out into the world, and I think the strategy tools community would be a great place to start. Ron Boer is here, and he can answer questions with me. He would be your point person to contact, so that's his information. There's a video. You can use it to get clients interested. It's right on YouTube, so that's a video of me explaining the thing. So the way it works is you reach out to us. You find a client, they provide contacts and sorting criteria, you send those to us, we'll do the back processing, right, and get you a report, which then you would use to work with your client if they were interested in doing this. And then our thought was probably you'd want to do the debrief if it's your client, but we can support you in that. And if you want us to do the debrief, we're open to that as well. Let's figure out what a good operating model might be. At the moment, we're experimenting. So, maybe you have some good ideas about how we can do this. So essentially it's, you find somebody that's interested in doing it, you get us the information we need to do the processing, we do the processing, and then we work together on how to give the client some feedback. So what does it look like? The kind of report you get back is something that looks like this. So the first thing is an overall look at where the client is. And so, as I said, we've got 8 levels, and it would give you a picture of where you are. And then that implies what you need to do to move up in proficiency, should the client think that that's important. So these are some example extracts from questions that appear in the survey. So this was an actual client engagement that we ran, which looked at different groups within the client entity scoring themselves differently on how mature they were. So we had this one rogue board member that was literally saying, "Oh, we're level 8, we're great," whereas most of the rest of the company was like, no, not so much. But the very fact that there's so much dispersion indicates that you've got a fairly immature process, I would argue. We also see a lot of lack of homogeneity among respondent groups. So we sorted the results by the different role. In this case, it was what they called additional innovation team members, the board of directors, the group executive, and other executives. And what you saw was very different perspectives. So it's a bit like talk about elephants, right? Everybody's looking at a different aspect of the elephant. So one of the questions we ask is, could you describe your organization's innovation system? Seems pretty straightforward, but 86% in this particular company couldn't even describe what it was. So that tells you a lot. We asked if they're having dedicated high-level reviews of their innovation process. So are they talking to senior level resource providers regularly? And in this particular company, only 15% said, yeah, we get dedicated time on the senior executive agenda to actually talk about what we're doing that's new. So that's a pretty strong signal. One of the questions we ask is, how difficult would it be for you to get small amounts of capital to test a new idea, or not even capital, small amounts of time, small amounts of resource? In this particular company, 66% of the funding was unstructured, and it would be very, very difficult to figure out how we get some money to do this, some resource to do this. This was a very telling question. How difficult is it to pull resources from a successful business to fund more uncertain opportunities? And in this particular case, the bulk of people said, it's almost impossible, or maybe we get it done if we have discussion. That generally means there's no system in place, right? It's not a capability. And what those are is symptoms that innovation in a company like that is typically underneath some person, right? And that person moves on, or the champion gives up, and it's not institutionalized. How important is innovation to your own performance metrics and in your compensation? 23%, not at all. 50%, well, sometimes. So 73% of the people in this particular company said, it doesn't really matter in my own compensation. Well, you don't have to be a genius to recognize if it's not important in your personal metrics, what you're getting rewarded for, then it's highly likely not to be important at a corporate level. This one I thought was really telling, which is line of business leaders fear that supporting innovation will hurt their results and compensation. And the bulk of them basically said, yeah, it's risky from a career point of view. Okay. So what these are example questions from, I think it's a 24 question survey. So we tried to keep it really simple. So it takes about 5 minutes to fill out. I mean, Christian, we did it on the phones in a masterclass that we ran. So it was very, very easy. It's not a heavy lift, but boy, it tells you some very, very revealing things about what's going on in your client organization. So as I said, the way it works is the client figures out how they want to categorize the groupings. They figure out who the respondent group is. They tell us, or you tell us, how you want to respond. We figure out, we poke people to go fill it out. The completed responses are analyzed. You get a report that looks, something like these charts would be what you get. We'll get a customized report, which we would go back to you with. If you have difficulty understanding what some of the things mean, we could explain it to you. But after one or two, it becomes pretty straightforward what it is. And then what we think it'll do for you as a consultant, or for you working with your client, is it's a great way to open up a conversation and just basically say, look, you don't have an innovation system that's robust and that is material. You're depending on individuals, you're depending on someone who's passionate really wants to do this, or someone who's, thinking is really concerned about it, but it's not baked into your systems and processes. And what we know, when things aren't baked into your strategy process, when things aren't baked into a routine, that it's just one executive departure away from collapsing entirely. And many of the big corporate dramatic non-success stories have been that, it's one or two key people leave, and then that the whole thing just erodes. A recent example I've been looking at is Cognizant, which was one of my kind of hero companies for many years. I mean, they just were a growth engine. Board of directors and departing CEO had a bit of a disagreement, brought in an outsider, key people left, and their processes just kind of collapsed in the last couple of years. So, I think it's interesting that what we're looking for is something that's a bit more systematic. So what are we trying to achieve? This balance, right? You need this balance between the core. And of course, the core is important. I've never said it wasn't. It's absolutely critical, but in many cases, it's not the future. So how does this all timing? It takes about 2 to 4 weeks, depending on how responsive the client is. That's usually the biggest blocker. It's not on our side. It's usually the last 10 people to fill out their bloody questionnaire. So say it's 2 to 4 weeks, depending on when the client responds. We're thinking for collaboration partners, something on the order of $500 to us to do the processing. And then we can talk about how we do the debriefs and whatever. And so whatever you want to charge on top of that, that's completely between you and your clients. We're just charging for the mechanics of getting the survey, getting that done, getting the pretty report printed, and so forth. And, something else we could talk about, and I'm open to questions on this, is we could do a webinar. If we wanted to do, say, a strategy tools collaborative webinar, when every client gets their personalized report and we do like a group debrief, we could envision doing something like that. So as I said, we're experimenting, we're open to ideas at this point, and it's really an invitation to work together. This is us, myself. And so me, I do a lot of thought leadership stuff. Ron, who maybe we should invite to make a few comments, is working with me trying to build the operational capability. And what I truly appreciate about Ron is, he's been a leader in many name brand corporations you would know, but he understands a lot about what it takes to actually make these things happen at scale in large organizations. And so I think between the two of us, we've got a very nice package. So thank you. It's Rita at Belize.com, Ron at Belize.com. And now I think, Christian, we have time for questions, or maybe we want Ron to say a few words.
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Rita. Thank you. But let's get Ron on stage and get his views on this. Go ahead, Ron.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm excited to. I love to be at events where I have the lowest IQ in the room. I always learn something really kind of fun. So thank you. And I like this. I like this process because I'm big on simplicity, and to me, this is a great way to kind of put your toe in the door at a client or within a division, and really start to understand what their pain points are, because there's a lot of kind of open-ended opportunities to come back in. In the breakout, we were talking a little bit about visualization, and Holger was, it's hard to see all the faces here, but he was talking about the fact, there he is, talking about the fact that until we get things down on a piece of paper or on a tablet, you can't really communicate well. And I was connecting the dots to an article I was reading on Bloomberg this morning about nobody wants to go back to work, right? So 25% of the population just doesn't want to do it. And if you live, I'm in the Metro New York area, and if I was to commute from the city, it'd be about an hour and a half for me to get into Manhattan. So I think there's some fascinating strategy questions that are really going to expose the lack of innovation mastery within most corporations these days. So this is a great tool, and I'm excited to be here. I'm more of a classical operator than a tool person or a strategy person, but as Rita says, I've been around the block a little bit. I understand how these things can and unfortunately can't often be implemented within current cultures and current operating environments. So great to meet all of you, and looking forward to getting to know all of you a lot more.
Well, thank you very much, Ron. And I'm not sure if your statement is accurate, but it was very kind of you. Good thing none of us are in the same room technically, so your statement is voided by its design. Rita, Ron, we have an ample time for question, comments. We're just going to open the floor for now, and I'll try to manage the crowd as best as I can.
I don't envy you that challenge, Chris.
I have the mute button.
Herding cats, you have the mute button, right? You have the all-consuming power. So, by the way, if I'm open to talking about anything else that we're working on a lot of different things. And one of the things we're really trying to do is create a whole suite of tools. And to get a flavor, if any of you are interested, if you go to valise.com, we have a downloadable, what we call a bare bones net present value calculator. It was a tool that I invented together with Ian McMillan back in the days of writing discovery-driven growth. It went obsolete, we pulled it down, but popular demand has said we really want it back again. So we've made it available, it's free, you can just go to the website, download it. And that's an example of the kind of thing we're hoping to make more broadly available. I think it goes very nicely, Chris, with your tool set.
So Rita Jacob had a question, which I think is relevant probably to a lot of people in the room about, is there a minimum size for profiling a company with the IMS? I think that's a great question. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, probably you want it to be bigger than, if you're all literally in the same room, you probably know a lot about each other's views of what's going on. So I would say, it doesn't have to be large. It doesn't have to be like, PepsiCo or something. It could be, I think for a mid-market company, even it could be hugely valuable because, I think once you get above about, I would say about 150 people, there's a lot of research that suggests that's when things start to really break down in terms of effortless communication, everybody knowing what's going on, people being on the same page. And so I think probably that's the point at which something like this could be very useful.
I have a follow-up question and then a comment, Rita. And I just want to check, because this is a partner success summit, so we kind of get into some of those pricing details, for example. So are you actually proposing 500 US for an unlimited size of population? So
this is the magic of digital world, right? Because once we got it set up, the incremental cost to us to add additional respondents is very small. So yeah, we can see it, that isn't a factor that adds a lot of cost. What adds cost is if there's a lot of debriefs or if there's a lot of, customization for the client, that kind of thing. But if it's just, you want 1,000 people to fill it out, fine. The computer's happy enough.
Super. So I have personally used this in a few different contexts. The first context was with the Norwegian rail company, and some of you have heard parts of that story previously. And in that case, there was a small project group. We had about 12 people, and we did the survey in the room on the wall. And Rita, I don't know if I've shown you those photos, but we actually mapped it out. We took some of your material and we printed it out large scale, and we kind of put it on the wall, and they had to go to the wall and place themselves on that sort of big chart. And like you said, it became a very strong visual representation. And they recognized that there was one outlier, the optimist, and then there was everybody else. And that really got them thinking in terms of, wow, we are not, as an organization, at all aligned on this. That was the first time. And that was an, paper-based, scissor cutting, paste on the wall, do it face-to-face environment. But the second time that we did it, and that was the masterclass. So this is a couple of years ago. It was in Norway. We had a sort of sold out masterclass, and we did it online. People were responding mostly by their phones or by their computers. And then after a quick coffee break or lunch break, we were able to project the outcomes on the wall instantly. And that was a really nice format because it allowed you to do it in a workshop session, but it was still being done online. So we've seen different use cases for how this can be applied in practice.
So see a question about, do companies go through the stages or can you leapfrog? It depends on how much of a corporate level commitment there is. So Typically, if you're doing it internally and you're not willing to spend a lot of resources, it is a more gradual progression the companies go through. Now, there are exceptions, and one I would draw your attention to is when Walmart finally decided to get serious about digital and made a $500 million acquisition of a company called Jet.com, which really was an acquisition of their CEO, a guy named Mark Lorry. They just threw everything at, we're going to go digital. This is do or die. This is bet the company stuff. And it worked. I mean, they injected, if you will, this digital DNA into how Walmart operates. So that's an example of a leapfrog. But I would say they had probably tried 4 or 5 times that I know about anyway. And I haven't worked with them, but as an outside observer, they tried and failed and tried and failed and tried and failed. And finally, Doug McMillon, who's their CEO, said, this is do or die stuff. This is existential. We're going for it. And so that was a leapfrog.
Rita, we also have a question here from James in South Africa. I want to have your answer first, and then I'll share my thoughts afterwards.
Sure.
But how would we link the innovation maturity scale to the larger strategy tool set? What's your thinking? I'll offer my insights.
Well, I think that I see it as really the opening of a conversation, because any assessment, it's like going to the doctor, right? They take your weight and your blood pressure and they say, well, here's where you are. And then you have a conversation about, well, okay, now that I know this, what do I do about it? So I don't think it provides you with answers. I think the strategy tool set is where you would go next. That's how I see it.
From my side, James, I think that is a great question to be explored. I sort of see the innovation maturity scale as a assessment that can be done at an opening, midway, and at the end of a 2-year, 3-year engagement, for example. So you have some data points, and then you have various initiatives and formats, workshops, engagements that you run in between the data points. So you can mix and match that in many different ways. If you dig deep into the details, I can sort of see us linking, you have the different maturity levels, and we could link different types of tools into the different levels based on where the client organization is. That's just a topic that we haven't explored yet. Ron, we're getting a question here from Jacobo. Is there a guideline / best practices for getting to the next phases as the client starts engaging on this?
Yeah, I mean, in my experience, and just to give a little bit of background, I grew up at Sony in the operating roles, and those of you who owned a Walkman, many of you might have bought it from me way back when, and I've moved into more retail operating roles, and I was a CEO of some public companies. In my experience, and we were also discussing this in the breakout, the most difficult best practice to break down is the practice of bringing this into the culture. And I've been in companies that have, I've heard this, I've lived this expression that culture will kill strategy. I've seen brilliant plans and great operating plans killed by culture. So having grown up at Sony, there's an expression, the fish rots from the head. So if you don't have leadership fully committed, and Rita just distributed an article, I just saw that, it wasn't her article, but she was talking about, it was an article that talked about this poor young lady. My heart kind of broke for her because she had left kind of a successful entrepreneurial type business and been recruited into running innovation for these companies. And in 4 separate companies, she was recruited into the company with this promise of, we're going to be innovators and we're going to learn how to do this thing and we're going to change the world. And, the ambulance will show up to your door before you even know you're having a heart attack, that kind of stuff. And 4 times leadership didn't fund her, didn't support her, and wasn't committed. So that's culture from the top. There's also culture from the bottom, where organizational momentum is so great that it just takes an incredible force of will by a team within the organization or a line leader to make something change. So to me, the biggest next step is preparing the human beings for change. And that's why I referenced that Bloomberg article this morning about people not wanting to go back to work. We've had 15 months in most of the world of working from home, being able to get up, and I'm sitting here in shorts, by the way. I'm not, sorry, Scott, I'm not wearing a suit. But, you know, I can sit here in shorts and
I am dressed. I'll have you.
Rita is always spectacular, no matter where she goes. You know, and I don't want to put a suit on and drive to Manhattan. I just don't want to do that. And that's going to be a major cultural change. And it took 15 months for us to get here. It's going to take a really long time to get people back into their cubes. You know, I have this, you know, image of Jamie Dimon cracking a whip, back to your cubes, you know, and so to me, it's like getting the biological pieces of your organization, which are the most critical pieces, getting their mindset, creating an environment and the resources to make this happen. To me, that's where it fails. Leaders wake up and go, I want a new strategy. And they, you know, post a note.
Oh, but I didn't want to do that.
No,
wait a minute.
No,
what you mean? You mean I have to do something different?
That's not my strategy. So
we get that all the time.
That's the biggest challenge. It's to me, it's the culture. Can leadership truly drive a cultural change, and will they financially support it? You know, it's very, very hard to invest in the mouse when the elephant is roaring, and you know you're not making the quarter, or you know, your bonus is tied to, you know, a stock price that is going to be a reflection of, you know, change in EBITDA, and you've got to spend 2% on innovation. And, you know, it's a very, very complex rubric that some of these leaders go through. And there's a lot of things in an organization that pull you down to that kind of net zero, place when you have momentum and you have scale. It's extremely difficult.
Hey, Rita, Ron, you know, I can say we're working either with the head of product or the head of transformation at 3 Fortune 100 companies right now in the US. And all 3 of them would be really interested in this. So I'll reach out and see if we can get a pilot and kick the tires on this. I think it's really exciting. And I think it could like tee up very, very rich, you know, kind of core capability and strategy discussions. So
yeah, and you know, there are a lot of instruments out there, but they're really long and they take forever. This thing takes maybe 5 minutes, right? I mean, Christian, it took 5-10 minutes to get the room filling it out. And I really see its value as this exactly, Jason, this ability to get a tough conversation going.
Yeah.
And as consultants, we like to start conversations.
Absolutely.
Especially if they're billable, right? So sounds good.
A good place. Well, Jason,
So
you have our contact info, so please feel free to reach out, and we'll help you any way we can.
Yeah. So a couple of other resources just while I've got the community here. So if you go to ritamcgrath.com and you can sign up for a monthly roundup of the writing and whatever I've done. I've also got a series of weekly articles that I post on Substack. Ron has a terrific set of articles he posts weekly on LinkedIn. So there's a lot of kind of good conversation starting material content out there. So please do connect with us. We're very excited to be part of the community.
Rita, we have a question here from Harvey Wade in the UK. Is it possible to see the tool in action before we take this into a client conversation? So, for example, example reports, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that, Christian, we should talk about is if we want to do like a dedicated webinar just on the tool and walk through it. And, you know, you guys could be like a pseudo company and we could get your responses and do something like that. I'm open to that.
Well, I'm seeing people from Italy, from Israel, from the UK, and maybe even a few Mexicans sort of nodding their heads. So I think the answer is yes. And the question is, Adelina, when should we set it up? Because, I mean, for those that are interested, that is a great onboarding testing environment.
Could be, yeah. So question about industry from Javier.
Great question.
So let me start off with, yes, I know a lot of people are very fixated on industry. I think it's a trap. I think the most significant competitor many companies face today is not in their own industry at all. So the first response I would have if somebody asks you that is, you know, probably that's not the best way to be thinking about how you're competing. But yes, we can, as we gather more data, we can actually map it out by industry. And I think what you're going to find is the usual suspects, right? Services businesses and digital businesses are going to be much higher because it's easier. Asset intensive businesses, you know, first of all, you don't necessarily want them doing, I mean, do you really want your local nuclear facility engaging in workforce experimentation? No, I really think you want them doing exactly what they're told. So I think, you know, there are places where this innovation thing is not necessarily universally a great thing. And so I think you will find that variation.
One last question, Rita, and we have people here that work with banks in Latin America, that work with technology companies in Europe, that work with fast-growing tech companies in Israel. What do you see as some of the use cases in terms of the full organization, the management team, the board, some of the use cases? And that's, we're going to start rounding up your great intro here.
For this particular tool?
Yes, yeah.
Oh, so I see. Well, let's start with the board, right? I mean, if I'm a board member today, given all that Ron has said about how management tends to be inbred and, you know, they're worried about their bonus and they're worried about the quarter, ultimately it's the board's responsibility to make sure the company has a future. And so I see it as that's where really, if I were a board member, I would want to understand this. And if the maturity scale is low, then that becomes something you can have a very hard conversation with management about, which is like, yes, you're talking innovation, but you know, you're actually doing squat. There's another tool, Christian, that you and I have talked about. We call it the imagination premium. And it's basically a way of getting at, for public companies, a way of getting at what a shareholder is willing to pay for your company beyond what you're generating in terms of day-to-day cash. And we think the two are linked. So we posit, and we're in the middle of doing this research right now, but we posit higher levels of innovation mastery are related to higher innovation premium. And if you look at somebody like Amazon, so we take the value of operations and compare it to the value of growth, and the bigger the number, right, the more value you're getting from prospects for growth. Amazon is a total imagination premium company. Tesla is a total imagination premium company. I mean, they take all the cash they get from operations and it goes right back into the business. They don't give dividends to shareholders. Whereas if you look at your local telco or many banks, right, they're very low imagination premium companies. Interesting, and you'll appreciate this, Chris, given your work with Equinor, oil and gas all over the map. There's some like Ørsted, oil and gas producer, that are very high on premium. People are saying, I believe you people are going to grow. And then there's some, like a number of companies that I won't mention their names, but that we're working with where they cannot get out of their own way in terms of the energy transition.
Well, Rita, Ron, I think that you have put down the gauntlet, you put down an invitation, you put down well, Jason, you stepped into it. So when we convene again for our next Partner Success Summit, I'm really looking forward to having a detailed case study of what happened next.
Great.
And the invitation is on the table for all. And we will be convening a more dedicated webinar to dive into the mechanics and test it out. And, you know, Rita, I can just vouch, having used this in practice, that this is a really, really impactful tool, and it fits perfectly into, you know, the larger community that we have here.
Thanks, Chris. Well, thank you for the time, and thank you everybody for listening. And we welcome feedback too. There may be things we haven't thought of that we need to improve. So we're very open to that as well.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you so much. This has been fun.
Thanks, Rita.
Rita, Ron, we're actually going to give you a round of applause, and just to